Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was low and hot over the cracked land near Prescott when Jesse Dalton stepped off his horse and heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a man shouting, drunk and angry, and the frightened whimper of a girl. Jesse tied off his horse and moved around the side of the saloon. The scent of sweat, gun oil, and sour whiskey hung in the air. A small crowd had gathered behind the livery, where the shouting came from. Jesse didn't stop to ask questions. He pushed his way to the front and saw a man, red-faced and swaying, waving a bottle and dragging 3 young women by the arms. "I said they're yours," the man barked, slurring his words. "All 3. My daughters. You want a wife? Take one, hell, take 'em all. I'm done feedin' mouths that don't bring in nothin'." The girls stood stiff, their dresses dusty and torn at the hems. The oldest, maybe 20, stared straight ahead. The second, with freckles and her arms folded over her chest, looked like she might spit. The youngest, just old enough to be called a woman, clung to the older one's sleeve. Jesse stepped in front of them. "Let them go," he said. The drunk blinked. "Who the hell are you?" Jesse kept his voice level. "I said let them go." The drunk lunged, but Jesse grabbed his wrist, twisted, and the bottle fell with a thud into the dirt. The crowd didn't move. Jesse's hand went to the revolver at his hip, but he didn't draw. He didn't have to. The man reeled back, nursing his wrist. "You gonna take them?"
"Fine.
"They're yours now."
You feed me."
"I'm done." He staggered off down the road toward the saloon, already reaching for another bottle. The oldest girl spoke first. "We don't know you." "I know," Jesse said. "But I couldn't just walk away from that." The freckled one crossed her arms tighter. "You planning to be our savior or something?" "No," Jesse said. "Just a man with a wagon and a cabin north of here. You do not owe me anything. I am offering a ride out of this town if you want it." The youngest looked up. "You got food?"
"Ido."
The oldest girl looked at her sisters, then back to Jesse. "We will go with you." Jesse nodded. "Names?" The oldest said, "Keziah Jameson. This is my sister, Kala. And the youngest is Liddy." Jesse touched the brim of his hat. "Jesse Dalton. My wagon's over there." They said nothing more, just followed him, quiet and worn, past the livery, past the curious eyes, and out to the weathered wagon where Jesse's horse waited. He helped them up, then climbed onto the bench. They drove north in silence, the road dry and hard beneath the wheels. Jesse did not ask them about their father. He knew too many stories like theirs, and the pain clung to them like dust. By nightfall, they stopped near a creek, and Jesse made camp. He unloaded sacks of flour and beans, built a fire, and handed Keziah a tin cup of water. "You do not have to be afraid," he said. "I am not," she said, but her voice cracked. Kala sat with her back to the fire, knife in hand, whittling a stick. Liddy curled beside her, already dozing. "You live alone?" Keziah asked. Jesse nodded. 10 miles north. Land is mine. Got a cow, chickens, orchard just starting to take. Not much, but enough. She studied him. "Why did you help us?" Jesse stirred the beans. "Because I saw 3 women being offered like horses. And that ain't right." Keziah looked at him for a long time. Most men would have taken advantage. "I am not most men," Jesse said. They ate in silence. Afterward, Keziah helped clean the tin plates, her hands steady, but her eyes far away. "You can stay as long as you need," Jesse said. She nodded once. "We will help with the work." "I would welcome it." That night, Jesse took first watch while the women slept in the wagon. Coyotes howled far off. He sat with his rifle across his knees and stared at the fire, thinking about the way Keziah looked at her sisters like she had been protecting them her whole life. The next day, they reached Jesse's place by mid-morning. The cabin sat on a rise above a narrow creek, fields of rye and corn behind it, a lean-to-stable, and 2 cows in the pen. The sisters climbed down from the wagon and stood looking at it like it was something out of a dream. "You built this?" Liddy asked. "Every board," Jessie said. Calla walked up to the porch, ran her hand along the rail. "It is solid." Keziah turned to Jessie. "We will earn our keep. You will not regret this." "I already do not," Jessie said, then tipped his hat and went to unhitch the horse. That first week, the rhythm settled and easy. Keziah cooked and mended, her hands always busy. Calla worked the garden with Jessie, and Liddy fed the chickens and read aloud from the 2 books Jessie owned. They spoke little, but something eased in the air. The tension in Keziah's shoulder softened. Calla started to laugh again. Liddy began to hum. One evening, Jessie found Keziah out by the orchard, watching the setting sun. He stepped beside her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I am.
Getting there."
"You're safe here." "I know." She looked at him. "Thank you." Jessie met her eyes. "You do not have to thank me. I want to." He looked down, cleared his throat. "You all have been real good to have around.
Does not feel so quiet now."
Keziah smiled just a little. "You do not seem like the kind of man to mind quiet."
"I do not," Jessie said.
"But I do not mind your company either." She reached out, brushed her fingers against his wrist. "I like it here." Jessie looked at her hand, then at her. "I like you here." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned and walked slowly back toward the cabin. Jessie stood under the peach tree a long time after that, watching the last of the light fade, feeling something bloom in his chest he had not felt in years. Not warmth, not hope, something stronger, something like love. The days leaned into one another like fence posts in wind. Late August carried dry heat and the scent of crushed chamomile underfoot. Jessie was up before dawn most mornings, splitting kindling or checking the fencing before the sun pulled itself over the ridge. He never asked the sisters to rise early, but Keziah always did, her braid damp from creek water and her boots already dusted from the walk to the henhouse. She found him one morning at the edge of the rye field, shirt sleeves rolled, sweat streaking the back of his neck. She didn't speak until he set down the scythe and wiped his brow. "We could trade extra eggs in town," she said. "Maybe get thread or molasses." He nodded. "I was thinking the same."
"We can go Saturday."
"You and me." Calla's been wanting a spool of green. Keziah looked toward the cabin. "She's been piecing a quilt." Jessie followed her gaze. "She's good with her hands." "She's good at pushing people away," Keziah said. "She always has been. But she'll come around." They walked back in silence. Jessie carried the scythe over his shoulder. Keziah walked with her arms folded, dark streaks under her nails from the garden. She stopped before the porch steps and turned to him. "You always this quiet?" He thought a moment. "Only when I have something to say." She gave a short laugh, not unkind. "That's backwards." "Maybe," he said, and stepped inside to wash up. By week's end, the air turned cooler in the evenings. Liddy started gathering wild plums near the creek, and Calla, without asking, began mending the fence line on the east side. Jessie watched from the barn roof, where he was patching the shingles. One night, as the wind picked up and dust scattered across the yard, Jessie found Keziah in the lean-to, oiling the lantern glass. "I heard Liddy ask you something earlier," he said. "She wanted to know if you were a gunslinger once." Jessie leaned against the post. "What did you tell her?" "That if you were, you buried it deep." He looked at his boots. "I did things during the war I don't brag over." Keziah dipped the rag into the oil tin. "You ever kill a man?" "Yes," he said. "Too many." She handed him the lantern. "Then maybe you're the right kind of man to keep us safe." He held the lantern, but didn't light it. "I don't want to be that kind of man again." "You aren't," she said. "You just carry the memory of one." Saturday came with a low sky and the promise of rain. The wagon creaked under the weight of 2 barrels of apples and a crate of eggs. Jessie held the reins. Keziah sat beside him, her hair pinned and her shawl folded neatly over her lap. Calla and Liddy stayed behind, the younger waving until dust swallowed the wagon. Prescott had grown since Keziah last saw it. New hitching posts out front of the mercantile, a new sign for the blacksmith shop. The din of people filled the air, boots on boards, voices raised, the clatter of a dropped pan. Inside the store, Keziah stepped carefully, her fingers brushing a bolt of muslin. Jessie spoke to the shopkeep, counting coins from his pocket, while Keziah chose a tin of pepper and a skein of red thread. She paused at a shelf lined with paper-wrapped soaps, her eyes lingering. He came up beside her. "You can get one." "I was just looking. I said you could get one." She chose the lavender. On the ride home, rain began to fall, gentle and steady, soaking the road and softening the silence between them. "Your land'll need that," she said. "I know." She turned her face to the wind. "You were right. Prescott's full of people who look past you. I don't go there for their company." She glanced at him. "You don't go for any company." He didn't respond right away. Then, used to think it was easier not needing anyone. And now? He looked straight ahead. "Now I think maybe I was wrong." Keziah didn't answer, but she settled back against the seat, her shawl damp, her hands folded over the paper-wrapped soap in her lap. That night, Jessie didn't sit his usual watch. He stayed inside, by the hearth, mending a harness strap while Keziah stirred ash into the soap kettle. Liddy read aloud from a book she'd borrowed from the preacher's wife, her voice light and steady. Calla, at the table, stitched green into her quilt. When the fire burned low, Keziah stood and stretched. She met Jessie's eyes across the room. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" he asked. She thought a moment. "A man who saved us for pride. Or pity. Or a price." "And what do you think now?" She stepped closer, her voice low. "I think you're a man who doesn't know how to ask for what he wants." He rose slowly, the harness strap forgotten in his hand. "And what do you think I want?" She looked up at him, steady. "A life that doesn't ache." Jessie let out a breath, not quite a sigh. "You think I could have that? If you let yourself." Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The wind had settled. And for the first time in years, Jessie let himself believe there might be something ahead worth reaching for. The frost came early that year, white veils clinging low to the grass before sunrise. By mid-September, Jessie had cleared the last of the corn, and the sisters worked to preserve what they could. Calla boiling jars over the hearth while Liddy strung beans on twine and hung them from the rafters like green garlands. The days shortened, and the rhythm in the house changed with the season's quiet. Keziah began spending more time near the pasture fence, watching Jessie work the young gelding he'd traded for in town. She didn't speak much during those hours, but Jessie felt her presence the way a man feels a mountain behind him, solid, unspoken, and steadying. One morning, she approached as he cinched the saddle. "You ever teach someone to ride?" she asked, brushing a burr from her sleeve. He adjusted the stirrup leather. "Not since I was a boy." Her mouth twitched at the corners. "Then you're due." They started in the corral. Keziah listened carefully, her posture upright, eyes scanning every motion before she tried it herself. Jessie kept his hands near, but never touched her unless she asked. By the third day, she rode the fence line alone, her shoulders loose, hair tied with a length of muslin dyed in blackberry juice. That evening, Jessie stood on the porch sharpening the drawknife, while Keziah pressed lavender water into the windowsills to keep the flies out. The scent lingered in the air between them. "Your mother teach you that?" he asked.
"No," she said.
"The woman who took us in after cholera took her. She was Choctaw, married to a blacksmith near Fort Smith. Had a garden that could feed a town." He set the blade down, listening. She taught me how to mend a soul without saying a word. Just kept handing me tasks. Darning, boiling soap, gathering roots. I didn't realize she was teaching me how not to fall apart. Jessie stepped down off the porch and looked at her through the fading light. You think you've learned it? Keziah met his eyes. I think I'm still learning. That night, the wind came hard from the west. Jessie woke to the sound of the barn door banging. When he opened it to check, he found Calla already there, tugging the latch closed with a strip of leather. You didn't have to come out, he said, lifting the lantern. I couldn't sleep, she answered, tying the knot tight. Liddy's been having dreams again. He held the light up. Bad ones. She cries without waking. Talks about water rising. Says Mama's voice sounds like it's coming through a wall. Jessie didn't offer comfort. He knew better than to speak over someone's hurt. She still listens to you, Calla said. That's something. He nodded once. She's strong. Calla exhaled hard, stepping back into the shadows. We all are. Doesn't mean we don't get tired. Jessie waited for her to say more, but she only nodded at the lantern and turned back toward the house. The next morning, Liddy was quiet over breakfast. She picked at her biscuit, eyes dull, the circles under them darker than usual. Keziah brushed a hand over her sister's back, and Liddy leaned into it without a word. Jessie poured hot water into a basin and placed it by the hearth. You're staying in today, he said to her. Liddy looked up, uncertain. What if the hens get into the garden again? I'll chase them out. She gave a small nod and laid her head against the table's edge. Later, Keziah stood beside Jessie under the cottonwood, sleeves rolled, helping him strip bark from the fence rails. Her hands worked in rhythm with his, the silence between them easy now, worn smooth. She's not a child anymore, Keziah said, eyes on the sap peeling away.
No, Jessie answered.
But some wounds don't care how old you are. Keziah paused, then said, When Mama died, I didn't cry. Not once. Calla screamed, and Liddy wouldn't speak for days, but I just kept boiling water and folding sheets. Thought if I kept moving, I'd outrun the grief. Did you? She looked at him. It caught up eventually, like it always does. A gust of wind sent a flurry of yellow leaves across the yard. Jessie brushed one from her shoulder. You don't have to outrun anything here, he said. Her eyes searched his face. Then what do I do with it? Let it come. I'll be here. That evening, Jessie built a small fire behind the barn and boiled coffee in a dented pot. Keziah joined him with a blanket around her shoulders and a letter clutched in one hand. It came from Fort Whipple, she explained. A woman there knew our mother when she was a girl. Says she remembers her playing fiddle behind the mission house. Said she laughed like she was full of thunder. Jessie handed her the tin cup. You ever hear her laugh like that? No, Keziah said. But I want to believe it's true. They sat in silence, the fire crackling low. Stars blinked out one by one as clouds rolled in from the east. After a long moment, Keziah reached across and took Jessie's hand. I don't know what this is, she said, but it feels like something that could last. Jessie looked at their joined hands, then at her. It does to me too. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he didn't move. The wind shifted, and the trees rustled like river water. And for the first time in either of their lives, they let the quiet mean something more than absence. By early October, the leaves along the creek burned gold, brittle underfoot, and the days thinned into crisp, amber-drawn hours. The work shifted to wintering stacking wood, packing salt into crocks, covering the root cellar shelves with burlap. What had once been a stranger's homestead now bore the weight of women's footsteps, of folded linens, of laughter low and steady during the quietest parts of the day. Jessie had built an addition to the cabin weeks earlier, a single room off the back wall with 2 small windows and a door that stuck when the air got too damp. It was meant for the sisters, to give them space of their own. But that morning, Keziah stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, studying the frame. "You cut the joists too short," she said. "I know," Jessie replied, hammer in hand. "I'll brace them before the first snow." She leaned in, squinting at the seam where the new wood met the old. "You ever think about building something permanent? A room for yourself that isn't just a cot beside the hearth?" He tapped the nail flush. "Didn't have much use for it before." "You do now." He paused, eyes on the grain. "I might." She ran her hand along the raw edge. "If you're gonna build something meant to last, you ought to do it right." He looked up at her. "You offering to help?" She raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm not able? I think you've got better eyes than I do." She stepped outside and called for Calla, who emerged from the pasture with a splinter in her palm and a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. "What?"
Calla asked.
"We're bracing the joists," Keziah said. Calla looked at Jessie. "You trust her with a hammer?" "I trust her with more than that," Jessie said. Calla scoffed but stayed to hold the beam steady. That evening, Jessie sanded the new corner post while Keziah stitched a hem by the fire. Liddy sat nearby, carving a letter into a piece of driftwood she'd found near the creek. It was the first time Jessie noticed her hands not shaking when she held the knife. "You carving something?" he asked her. "It's Mama's name," she said, "for the grave back in Arkansas. We never got to mark it." Keziah looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "You're gonna leave it there next spring?" Liddy nodded. "I want her to know we remember." Jessie watched her for a while, then said, "If you want, I'll ride with you when the time comes." Liddy didn't speak, just pressed the knife into the wood again. Later, when the others had gone to their beds, Keziah lingered by the fire. Jessie sat with his boots off, elbows on his knees, watching the last embers shift. "You mean it," she said quietly. "Mean what?" "That you'd go back with her. All that way." "I'd go farther." Keziah folded her arms across her chest. "You've got a stillness about you, Jessie." "Not everybody does." "I wasn't always still." "I don't imagine you were." He looked over at her. "You ever think about staying? For good?" She walked slowly to the chair across from him and Saturday. "I've thought about it every day since the first frost. I don't have much to offer. You have a roof that doesn't leak, hands that don't hurt, and a way of looking at people that makes them stand taller." He leaned forward slightly. "You've always carried too much." Her voice dropped, lower than before. "I think I could lay it down, if I had somewhere to put it." "You can put it here." She looked at him, and something in her face stilled. "I don't need saving." "I know," he said. "You never did." She rose then and crossed to him, slow, certain. When she reached his side, she didn't speak. She just bent down, touched her lips to his forehead, and let her hand rest on his shoulder. "I'll be here in the morning," she said. He didn't move. "So will I." Outside, the wind changed direction, and somewhere in the dark, a barn owl called once, then went silent. Inside, the fire burned low, and for the first time, Jessie let it die without feeding it, knowing the warmth would stay until morning. The first real snow came in the night, soft as sifted flour, blanketing the field rows and dusting the bare orchard limbs. Jessie stirred from sleep before dawn, the cabin thick with the quiet that follows snowfall. He pulled on his boots, careful not to wake anyone, and stepped outside into the stillness. The air bit at his cheeks, but the sky was clear, pale with early light. Smoke rose from the chimney behind him, slow and steady. He checked the gate, now frozen shut, and used his boot heel to clear the drift from the barn door before stepping inside. The gelding nickered low, breath steaming, and Jessie moved without hurry, laying hay and breaking the ice from the trough. By the time he returned, the cabin was warm with movement. Calla had taken to the stove, sleeves rolled, flour dusting her apron. Liddy sat cross-legged on the floor, stringing dried rose hips with a needle. Keziah stood in the doorway of the new room, her braid loose, watching Jesse take off his coat. "The fence by the creek'll need shoring by next thaw," she said. He set the coat aside. "I'll need help measuring the posts." "I'll come," she said. "And Liddy's well enough to keep the fire going now." Calla didn't look up, but her voice was even. "She can handle it." They left just before noon, the snow crunching underfoot. Keziah carried a cloth-bound bundle of biscuits and dried venison. Jesse brought the hand saw and a rough pencil to mark the rails. The path followed the creek bend, where the water still moved beneath a skin of ice. When they reached the fence, Keziah crouched to inspect the lowest rail, her gloves brushing away frost.
"This one's split," she said.
"Won't last another freeze." He knelt beside her. "We'll cut new lengths from the ash near the ridge." As they worked, she asked without looking up, "You always planned to be alone before we came?" "I thought I'd earned it," he said. "Didn't figure on wanting more." She paused, eyes on the saw blade. "And now?" He met her gaze. "Now I think I was just waiting." She sat back on her heels, snow melting on the back of her coat. "There's something you ought to know." "All right. When our father started drinking, I was 16. I got us through by bargaining, trading pies for cloth, mending boots for flour. I told myself if I kept us fed, it didn't matter what we lost." "You kept them alive," Jesse said. "But I started thinking that was all. I was someone who could hold things together long enough to make it through another day." "You're more than that. I didn't know that until here." He set the saw down. "You want to stay?" She nodded. "If it's yours to offer." "It is." They finished the repairs in silence, hands red from the cold, breath rising in small clouds. On the walk back, Jesse took her gloved hand in his, and she didn't let go. That night, Calla surprised them with a jar of preserved peaches and a small cake sweetened with molasses. Lydia had cut sprigs of pine and tucked them between the windowsills and floorboards, filling the cabin with a scent of clean earth and evergreen. After supper, Keziah stood near the fire, hands clasped. "There's something I'd like to say." Calla looked up from her sewing. "Go on." "We've been running since Mama died. From one place to the next, always waiting for something to fall apart. But this place doesn't feel like it's about to break." She turned to Jesse. "It feels built to last." Liddy smiled, soft and slow. Calla gave a single nod, then returned to her stitches. Jesse crossed the room, took Keziah's hand. "I'd like to marry you." Her throat worked once before she answered, "Yes." They stood a while like that, no rush to move, the others carrying on around them as if nothing had changed, because everything already had. They were married 2 weeks later, by the preacher who rode out from town once a month. Calla wore a shawl she dyed with walnut hulls, and Liddy lined the porch with pine cones dipped in beeswax. Keziah wore her mother's locket, the one she'd kept wrapped in linen all those years, tucked beneath her dress. After the vows, Jesse and Keziah stood on the porch while snow fell slow and quiet. "You still want to build that new room?" she asked. He looked at her. "Only if it's ours." She leaned into him. "Then I'll help nail the roof beams come spring." The weeks that followed were steady. Calla began trading her quilts in town, taking Liddy with her each time. Keziah kept the house, taught Jesse how to cut fabric on the grain. Jesse planted winter wheat, built a cradle with carved spindles, though no one asked why. When spring came, they made the trip back to Arkansas. They found the clearing where the house once stood, now only stones and thistle. Liddy laid the carved driftwood down, and they stood in silence, wind stirring the grass. Keziah whispered, "She would have liked this." Jesse took her hand. "She'd be proud of you." They rode home slow, stopping to rest in the shade of cottonwoods. When they returned, the orchard had bloomed. Years passed, but nothing faded. Jesse's hair silvered at the temples, and Keziah's laugh deepened into something richer. Their son grew tall and sure-footed, with his mother's calm and his father's hands. Liddy married a kind-eyed boy from town who built her a house with wide windows. Calla never married, but she stayed close. Her quilts hung in homes across 2 counties. And Jesse and Keziah? They stayed. Through storms and stillness, through harvests good and lean. They worked side by side each day, and at night, they sat on the porch, fingers twined, watching the land they'd made into a life. Not because they needed to, but because they could. Because they had each other. And that was enough. Always.